In 1985, Michael Jackson bought something priceless, the rights to most of the Beatles songs. What made it shocking wasn't just the $47.5 million price tag. It was that he outbid his own friend, Paul McCartney. This isn't a tabloid feud. It's a business story, one about publishing rights, power moves, and how one of the greatest friendships in music was broken by the ultimate insider deal. Today, we're unpacking how a pop icon became a music mogul and why Paul never forgave him. In the early 1980s, pop music was exploding. MTV was in its prime, cassettes were everywhere, and stadium tours turned musicians into global icons. But behind the scenes, a quieter shift was happening. The real money wasn't in record sales. It was in publishing, owning the rights to the songs themselves. Whoever owned the publishing earned a cut every time a song played on the radio, was covered by another artist, used in a movie, or performed live. Record labels had always known this, but artists were just starting to catch on. For decades, most had signed away their publishing rights for a quick advance, but now savvy musicians were waking up. Buying catalogs, especially older, proven hits, was becoming the music industry's version of buying real estate, and one of the sharpest buyers was an ex-Beatle. Paul McCartney had been famous for over 20 years by the time the 1980s rolled around. But fame wasn't enough. Paul understood money. More specifically, he understood music rights. Since the 1970s, he'd been quietly buying publishing catalogs, old rock songs, show tunes, anything that held long-term value. He'd learned the hard way. The Beatles had lost control of their own publishing decades earlier, and Paul was determined not to make that mistake again. He even joked in interviews about it, casually mentioning how he and his wife Linda would sit down and buy up songs over dinner. That's the game, he'd say, not just writing the hits, but owning them. And for years, Paul had his eye on one particular prize, getting the Beatles catalog back. Meanwhile, on the other side of the Atlantic, Michael Jackson was on a different kind of rocket ride. After Thriller dropped in 1982, Michael wasn't just a pop star. He was a global phenomenon, but success brought new interests. He wasn't just focused on choreography and vocals anymore. He was watching the numbers. Surrounded by lawyers, advisors, and older industry veterans, Michael started asking questions. How do royalties work? What's publishing? Who really makes money from a hit song? One of his mentors was Walter Yetnikoff, the president of CBS Records. Another was Paul McCartney himself. Michael wasn't just listening. He was studying. And unlike many young stars, he wasn't blowing his money on cars or jets. He wanted to own something real. It started with music, like it always does. In 1982, Paul and Michael recorded The Girl Is Mine, a playful duet for Thriller. A year later, they were in the studio again for Say, 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 a hit that topped charts around the world. Behind the scenes, the two megastars became genuine friends. They talked shop, hung out at each other's houses, and bonded over their unique place in music history. Both had known fame young. Both had been part of world-changing groups, and both were now navigating solo careers with huge expectations. But it wasn't just about singing together. They talked business too. Publishing came up often. Paul would mention catalogs he was looking at. Michael would ask questions. It was part music, part mentorship. At least that's how it seemed. There's one moment, small at the time, massive in hindsight, that people still talk about. During one of their hangouts, Paul showed Michael a binder. Inside were pages and pages of songs he owned, not ones he'd written, but ones he'd bought. Buddy Holly, Little Richard, standards from the 50s and 60s. This, Paul said, is how you really make money in music. Not from touring, not from record deals, but from publishing. Michael was fascinated. He kept flipping through the binder wide-eyed. Paul laughed and told him he should get into it. It's a great investment, he said. You should start buying songs. Paul meant it as friendly advice, the kind older stars give to younger ones. He didn't know he was planting a seed. That casual afternoon with the binder ended with a line that now sounds like a plot twist. As Paul wrapped up his publishing tutorial, Michael, ever curious, ever ambitious, smiled and said something that stuck. "One day," he told Paul, "I'm going to buy your songs." Paul laughed it off. It sounded like a joke, a harmless, quirky Michael moment. But looking back, it reads differently, more like a declaration. Maybe Michael meant it playfully, maybe he was dead serious. Either way, it was a flash of irony in a friendship that was about to shift. Because soon the very catalog Paul had lost decades earlier was going back on the market. And the student, now armed with the lesson, was ready to make a move. To understand the storm that was coming, you have to go back to the 1960s. When the Beatles were young and hungry, they signed away their publishing rights to a company called Northern Songs. It was a common move back then, get a quick advance, lose control. But Northern Songs didn't just publish Beatles music, it owned it. And over time, through mergers and sales, that catalog changed hands. By the late 70s, the rights were folded into a massive music company called ATV Music. Paul had tried to buy Northern Songs in the past, back when he had less money and less leverage, but it slipped through his fingers. He never stopped wanting it back. He just didn't know that one day it would come back around, with competition. ATV Music wasn't just a dusty filing cabinet of songs. It was one of the crown jewels of pop publishing. It owned around 4,000 songs, and that included most of the Beatles' biggest hits. Yesterday, Hey Jude, Let It Be, All You Need Is Love, all of it was in there. Every time a Beatles song played in a commercial, a movie, or a cover album, ATV got paid, and that meant the catalog wasn't just nostalgic. It was lucrative. It brought in millions a year and would for decades. For collectors, it was like owning the Mona Lisa, but with royalties. It was rare, valuable, and tightly held. But in 1984, that changed. The Australian tycoon who owned ATV, Robert Holmes à Court, decided to sell, and word got out. The moment Holmes à Court put ATV on the table, the music world buzzed. This wasn't just a deal, it was the deal. The kind that made headlines in Billboard and had executives flying across oceans. For Paul McCartney, it was emotional. Here was a chance to reclaim the music he and John had written in their 20s, songs that changed the world. But Paul wasn't the only one paying attention. Michael Jackson heard about the sale through his lawyers and advisors. His team moved fast, entering the bidding quietly but aggressively. And while Paul had the history, Michael had something else. Momentum. He was young, rich, and unafraid to play the game. Behind closed doors, both men circled the same catalog, but only one would strike. Paul had money, but what he didn't have, or maybe didn't want to spend, was that much money. The asking price for ATV was around $40 million. To Paul, it felt inflated, maybe even insulting. Why should he pay a fortune to buy back songs he co-wrote? There was also a principle involved. Paul believed the catalog should come back to him and Yoko Ono, John Lennon's widow, as a kind of moral right. He reportedly hoped the seller would see it that way. But the seller didn't care about sentiment, only cash. As negotiations moved forward, Paul stepped back. Maybe he thought the price would drop. Maybe he thought no one else would bite. But someone did, and that hesitation would cost him more than just money. When word of the ATV catalog reached Michael Jackson, he didn't hesitate. This wasn't just another investment. This was the investment. The very idea of owning Beatles songs, the most iconic catalog in modern music, lit something in him. He brought in John Branca, his entertainment lawyer and business advisor, and told him to find out everything: price, terms, players. Branca, a sharp dealmaker with music industry muscle, understood the opportunity immediately. Michael wasn't just being curious now. He was serious. He wanted to win. To him, this wasn't a betrayal. It was business. And he remembered Paul's advice. Publishing was power. The student was ready to become a mogul, and he was willing to play hardball to get there. The ATV sale wasn't a simple handshake. It was months of maneuvering. Michael's team negotiated quietly, deliberately. Branca advised him to stay out of the press and off the radar. They didn't want a bidding war. Other companies, including EMI and Warner, sniffed around the deal, but Michael's offer moved faster. He didn't try to lowball. He made a full-price bid early, showing he was serious. His team worked late nights, going line by line through the catalog. Michael even sent handwritten notes saying how much he admired the Beatles. Some say it helped soften the seller. In the end, it wasn't just about the number. It was about who moved fastest, who was most committed. And Michael was both. Quietly, confidently, he positioned himself to take the crown. In August 1985, it was official. Michael Jackson had bought ATV Music for $47.5 million. With one deal, he became the owner of over 250 Beatles songs, the same songs Paul McCartney had once tried and failed to get back. For Michael, it was a power move. He wasn't just a performer anymore. He was a publisher, a rights holder, a businessman with one of the most valuable catalogs in the world. The deal stunned the industry. Here was a 27-year-old pop icon outmaneuvering old-school executives and even his own mentor. And while people debated whether he overpaid, history would prove him right. The catalog would go on to earn hundreds of millions. Michael didn't just make a smart investment. He made a legacy play. The headlines were instant and electric. Michael Buys Beatles ran across newspapers and music magazines. The media couldn't get enough of it. The king of pop now owned the crown jewels of pop music history. Fans were stunned. Industry insiders were floored. And behind the splashy headlines was a deeper shift. A young black artist had just taken control of a catalog that had been dominated by old white British executives for decades. To some, it felt revolutionary. To others, it was pure business genius. But everyone agreed on one thing. Michael Jackson had changed the game. And while the world buzzed with surprise, one person in particular wasn't celebrating. In fact, he hadn't even known the deal was done. Paul McCartney didn't get a heads up. No courtesy call, no friendly note. He found out the way the public did, through the media. And when he read the headlines, he was stunned and then hurt. He later said he felt betrayed, blindsided by someone he once considered a friend. This wasn't just business to Paul, it was personal. These were the songs he'd written with John, the songs they'd bled over in smoky studios, the lyrics that defined their youth. To see them land in the hands of someone he once mentored, it cut deep. Paul stayed quiet at first, but over the years he let the disappointment show. "I think it was dodgy," he once said in an interview. A friendship built on music had turned into a business split, and the wound didn't heal quickly. After the sale, the air between Paul and Michael turned cold. There was no public argument, no harsh interviews. But behind the scenes, the silence said everything. The two men who had once recorded together, laughed together, and even talked business together, stopped calling. Paul, always the diplomat, remained professional in public. But insiders say he felt deeply betrayed. Michael, on the other hand, didn't reach out. The warmth was gone. Their friendship, once built on mutual admiration, couldn't survive the weight of a multi-million-dollar deal. The damage wasn't loud, it was quiet, slow, and irreversible. Two of the biggest names in music quietly drifted apart, not because of creative differences, but because of a contract. And in the world of publishing, contracts speak louder than words. Michael Jackson was never one to gloat, but when asked about the Beatles catalog deal, his answer was short and pointed. "Hey, it's just business, Paul." That was it. No apology, no defense. just the language of a man who saw music as both art and asset. For Michael, buying the rights to the Beatles wasn't personal. It was strategic. He had grown up idolizing McCartney, sure, but now he was operating on a different level. He was thinking generational wealth, residuals, leverage. Michael had learned that in the music world, owning is everything. And while fans saw betrayal, Michael saw execution. Paul may have given the advice, but Michael had run with it. And he wasn't looking back. He had entered a new phase, one where emotion took a backseat to enterprise. Here's where the story takes a surreal twist. After the deal closed, every time Paul McCartney or any of the surviving Beatles performed their own hits, songs they wrote, sang, and made famous, a piece of the royalties flowed to Michael Jackson. That's right, McCartney had to pay Jackson's company to play Hey Jude or Yesterday. Even if he just wanted to license a Beatles tune for a project, he had to go through Jackson's legal team. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Paul had once been the mentor and the elder statesman sharing financial wisdom. Now, he was effectively leasing his own legacy from his former protege. It was a bitter pill, one that sparked debates about ownership, legacy, and who really profits from the art that moves the world. Michael's Beatles acquisition didn't just shake up friendships, it shook the entire music business. Artists suddenly woke up to the real value of publishing. This wasn't about fame or album sales anymore. It was about control, ownership, residual income for life. After the Jackson deal, the industry saw a wave of musicians scrambling to buy back their rights, or at least understand the fine print in their contracts. Labels and executives took notice too. Catalogs weren't just assets. They were golden geese. Publishing became the most valuable chess piece on the board. Michael had flipped the script. No longer just the product, the performer could now be the power broker. And the ripple effects of that deal are still felt today in every rights acquisition headline you read. By buying the Beatles catalog, Michael Jackson did something few artists ever pull off. He crossed over into true mogul territory. This wasn't branding, this wasn't merch, this was infrastructure. Suddenly, Michael wasn't just a pop star on magazine covers. He was sitting at the table with music executives calling shots. He owned masters, controlled licensing, and had a say in what ads Beatles songs could appear in. It changed how people in the industry saw him. He wasn't just the king of pop anymore. He was the king of publishing. It was a power move that put him in a league with the likes of Clive Davis and David Geffen. And for Michael, it was just the beginning. He saw a future where artists didn't just create culture, they owned it. The Beatles catalog was only step one. After ATV, Michael went hunting for more. He quietly acquired rights to songs by Elvis Presley, Ray Charles, and even Sly and the Family Stone. Then, in 1995, he made his boldest move yet, partnering with Sony to merge ATV with their publishing division. The result was Sony ATV, one of the largest music publishing companies on earth. Michael kept 50% ownership and received a massive payout as part of the deal. He had taken a $47.5 million investment and turned it into a billion-dollar powerhouse. Even after his death, that catalog continued to generate hundreds of millions. Michael had done what few pop stars ever even attempt. He built an empire, not on performances, but on rights, on ownership, on the long game. In the years following the sale, media outlets painted two very different pictures of Michael Jackson. Some headlines called him a visionary, a young artist who made the ultimate power play by purchasing the publishing rights to the most valuable song catalog in the world. Others were less kind, framing him as cold, calculating, even disloyal. Tabloids fed on the drama between Jackson and McCartney, fueling speculation about betrayal and ambition. But Michael wasn't talking. He never publicly gloated, never addressed the growing rift. Instead, he played the long game, quietly collecting checks every time a Beatles song aired in a commercial or movie. To some, he was a genius. To others, a traitor. The truth? Probably somewhere in the middle, but by now the friendship had taken a hit that wouldn't heal. By the late 90s, Paul McCartney started speaking more openly about what had happened. As you can hear the sadness in his voice in old interviews. He doesn't rage, he reflects. Paul describes feeling blindsided, saying he thought Michael was a friend, someone he had helped, he had shown him the ropes, shared his playbook for investing in music publishing, and in return, Jackson had scooped up the Beatles catalog without warning, never offering a share, never even calling to talk it through. For McCartney, it wasn't about the money, it was about trust. Their collaboration had produced chart-topping duets, but after the deal, they never recorded together again. The bond between them, once playful and musical, was quietly, painfully severed. Throughout the 90s and early 2000s, McCartney made several attempts to buy back the rights to the Beatles songs. He approached Michael privately and through intermediaries. He hinted at it in interviews, hoping maybe public sentiment would help shift things. But Jackson didn't budge. Whether it was stubbornness, pride, or just business, he held firm. At one point, he reportedly told Paul, "It's just business, Paul." That one line, simple, emotionless, stuck, and it underscored the shift. They were no longer peers in the studio. They were businessmen on opposite sides of the table. McCartney never took legal action. He didn't launch a public campaign. He waited and watched as his songs, the ones he'd written with Lennon, earned millions for someone else. In 1995, Jackson made another bold move. He merged his ATV catalog with Sony's publishing arm, forming Sony ATV, instantly becoming one of the most powerful music publishing companies in the world. It wasn't just Beatles songs anymore. Sony ATV controlled tracks from artists like Bob Dylan, Joni Mitchell, and Elvis. Jackson kept a 50% stake, while Sony brought in global infrastructure and licensing muscle. For Jackson, it was a strategic masterstroke. It gave him scale, legitimacy, and deep-pocketed backing, but it also added complexity. Now every decision had to be negotiated. And Paul, he was watching as the catalog drifted further and further from his reach. The songs that once defined a generation were now just assets, split across corporations, bundled into deals, and priced like real estate. By the early 2000s, Jackson's financial empire was under strain. Lavish spending, lawsuits, and a lifestyle built on fantasy had left him deep in debt. Ironically, the Beatles catalog, once a bold acquisition, became his lifeline. He used it as collateral for loans, relying on its consistent value to keep his empire afloat. Sony, ever pragmatic, saw opportunity in his vulnerability. Over time, their influence grew. By 2006, they had the option to buy out more of his share. Michael resisted for years, but the numbers kept tightening. What started as a savvy play to control music history had become a chess piece in a corporate survival game. And when Jackson died in 2009, the catalog he'd fought so hard to own, the one that helped make him rich and cost him a friendship, was no longer fully his. When Michael Jackson died suddenly in 2009, the world mourned the king of pop. But behind the scenes, attention quickly turned to his assets, and none loomed larger than his stake in Sony ATV. The man who once danced on stage in a fedora also controlled the publishing rights to over 250 Beatles songs. With Jackson gone, the big question became, what happens to that catalog? Would it stay with his estate? Would Sony make a move? Jackson had been fiercely protective of his share, even during financial crises, but now, with lawyers and executors in charge, the catalog that caused so much drama, even heartbreak, was suddenly in play again. And for the Beatles, for McCartney, the door cracked open for the first time in decades. In 2016, the inevitable happened. Sony struck a deal with the Jackson estate to buy out Michael's remaining 50% stake in Sony ATV for $750 million. It was one of the largest deals in music publishing history. With that, Sony gained full control of the catalog, no longer needing to share decisions, profits, or rights with Jackson's estate. For Sony, it was pure strategy. Consolidate power, simplify operations, and hold the keys to some of the most valuable songs ever written. For fans, it marked the end of an era. The Beatles songs that once changed music history were now squarely in corporate hands. Jackson's gamble had paid off financially, but the dream of creative control and legacy had passed to boardrooms and balance sheets. But just when it looked like the catalog was out of reach for good, U.S. copyright law gave Paul McCartney a second chance. A little-known statute allowed artists to reclaim rights to songs 56 years after their original release. Starting in 2017, Paul began filing to reclaim ownership of his Beatles compositions, not from Michael or his estate, but from Sony. It was slow, technical work, no headlines, no dramatic standoffs, just legal filings, negotiations, and quiet victories. Over time, Paul regained partial control over hits like Love Me Do and I Saw Her Standing There. It wasn't everything, and it wasn't the catalog as a whole, but it was a powerful reversal. After decades of watching others profit from his work, McCartney was finally bringing pieces of it home. The Jackson-McCartney saga became a case study in ownership and a wake-up call for the music industry. Artists realized that fame wasn't the same as control, and that publishing rights could outlive fame, trends, and even the artists themselves. Younger musicians started to wise up. They studied contracts, bought back masters, launched their own labels. Artists like Taylor Swift would later battle for control over their catalogs, with Jackson's story as context. What started as a personal rift in the 1980s turned into a movement, a shift in how artists viewed power, legacy, and money. Michael Jackson didn't just buy the Beatles, he changed how artists think about what they actually own. And in doing so, he rewrote more than pop charts. He rewrote the rules of the business. And that's the story, how a friendship turned into $1 billion power play. It makes you wonder, was Michael Jackson wrong for outbidding McCartney, or was he just playing the business game better? And if you were in Paul's shoes, would you have done anything differently? Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every one. If you enjoyed the story, tap like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still spins Beatles vinyl or remembers watching Thriller on MTV. And if you want to see how the internet's first financial mania involved a $3 toy that sold for $15,000, then don't miss my last video, The Wild Rise and Crash of the Beanie Baby Bubble. It's a time capsule of hype, greed, and the birth of online speculation. Check it out next.